on Chapter 2 of Bruce Bueno de Mesquita's The Predictioneer's Game. This chapter is entirely devoted to Bruce's method for buying cars, and I've known the guy since 1990-ish, and totally does this. And it's more than that, right? This chapter is about applying game theory, and it's unusual in that we're getting everything all at once, right? We're getting game theory in the wild, in its use. We're getting concepts of information, but we're not, the word equilibrium is never being used in this, and there's a whole bunch of things that were you to normally go through an approach to teaching game theory, we would start with, okay, here's a game, and players have strategies, and you figure out an equilibrium, and that's the outcome, and it's chicken, This goes straight into it, and it shows it in context. And so there's a lot of technical things that haven't been introduced to the reader of the book and aren't assumed to be known, but in a lot of ways, I think this is a very clever way of going about this because we're seeing what can be done. And so, not to repeat the car buying example in toto, but Bruce in this chapter looks at the traditional method and he analyzes it. And he says, look, you're forced to go into a dealership. The way it works, the way it's set up, you go to the dealership, you commit, you're there, you've committed to buying a car then and there. And in your interactions with the dealer, you inevitably reveal information. And the way the dealers typically work is they say, what will it take to put you in this car? And that means you have to give a price. Now, pay one price dealerships, there are counterexamples to this, I realize, but go with that. Okay, go with what he's saying the typical thing is, because you're analyzing that situation. And it's this example is useful, and it shows how do you analyze an interaction between two players, the buyer and the seller of the car, and what do you look for, and how do you interpret how it works, and how this structure affects the outcome, especially in terms of which player is going to do better than the other. So the traditional method, he claims, is like it forces you to commit and reveal a whole lot of information. Internet sales are better. However, he argues that you still go to the place, you still commit, and that creates the opportunity for the dealer to say, well, how about if, to upsell you, to get you off script, right? A lot of it is the complaints he has, or the criticism he has of this approach is you still commit, you're still susceptible to being taken off script. Also, you are coming in with a price, right, that's been quoted online, and you're not sure that that's the best price possible, right? It is better because it is somewhat competitive, you have multiple bids, but still not good enough. Now, his method, not to go completely into it, read the chapter, right? But he is going to have you basically set up an auction. And what might not be immediately noticeable about his method here, even though he says it, right? He says very clearly, adamantly, do your research first. You have to know everything there is to know about the car. And he says, don't go to the dealership. It's too easy to get sucked in, right? You should do your research online. And I don't know how he did it in the 90s, because I literally knew the guy before there was the internet as we now know it. There was an internet, but it was, anyway. There wasn't a World Wide Web. The point is, though, that in terms of game theory, what he's doing is he's saying, get your preferences first. Learn everything you need to know out of it. And so you're separating your fact finding that you typically do when you go to a dealership. You're typically conflating your learning process about the car, your information gathering process, with the negotiation, because the guy's there, right? Also, I think in another level, there's this idea in game theory that technically in the theoretical portion of it, that player preferences are set. They're complete. You know what you want. You know exactly what you want, and they don't change. Of course, it's not true with a car. I don't know what a car is worth to me until I drive it. So he's separating that out. Important first step to make it more like the conditions that game theory deals with. right? Also to separate, to keep you away from giving up information in that process. So that's the first point to make, that his method implicitly separates out the two different functions. Then he says he set up an auction amongst dealers, and he describes in detail how that works. Basically, you call dealers up and say, I'm going to buy a car, give me the price. I'm going to call someone else, tell them what price you give me, so make it a good price. And I'm going to show up with a check to buy that car at 5 o'clock, and thou shalt give it to me or not. And maximum walking away potential here, right? And so it's a phone auction, and you call many dealerships. And the key thing is you're setting up an auction amongst dealers. They have to give you the price. They have to quote the price. And he argues that the incentives here, and here's the thing about game theory, right? The way the incentives work, you have set up a game where the other guy has an incentive to reveal the lowest price possible. And that is the key to this, right? So that's his method. Now, what's the takeaway from this? One is, I think in some ways this is kind of cool for people because, hey, this is what you can do, right? If you're someone who is like when I teach the course, learning about game theory, and you're spending time, chicken, what does this got to do with anything? Well, here you go. Here is an application of game theory to real life. And so it is interesting, and it shows you how, hey, look, when you look at the world, you may well want to do this kind of thing. Look at negotiations between two parties, or look at an economics or a policy situation and say, hey, what is the game here? And then let's analyze it in terms of what each player is committing to and revealing, and that sort of thing shows you this is what you can do with game theory, okay, at that level. He's also demonstrating his concept of engineering the future. Well, what if you try a different game, right? What if we do this other thing? And here's the what if analysis, right? Let's do an alternate structure. And this type of analysis is very important, for policy advice, for advising people, hey, how should we deal with this problem, right? Games aren't always set up in a lockstep manner. Sometimes you have control over, agenda control is huge, right? And if you can control the structure, and very often you have some, when negotiating, you do have limited control in terms of, when you meet, where you show up, who you bring, there's a lot of things that can go into this. So this engineer the future aspect is very much here, how you can construct alternate games and do this kind of what if analysis. But the bottom line, I think, with this chapter is it does whet one's appetite for more game theory, much better than, all right, here's a prisoner's dilemma, the way we normally teach game theory, where you go slow, you learn one thing at a time. Amongst purists who teach it, this might be sloppy, right? There's just a whole lot of things that are implied and informal in this example. You're bringing in concepts of information without, a strict mathematical, approach to it. On the other hand, I think it just really does whet one's appetite for the future. And I think that can be important in teaching this. So I think that's this role. I think probably why he went through this. So those are the takeaways I see from this, a pithy little chapter. To be honest with you, if you stayed this long, I will share this with you. Yeah, I was a guy's student, and I in 1990 something, he told me this is how you're supposed to do it. I have bought many cars since then. I've never done this. However, my extensive knowledge of game theory has informed me of just how screwed I am every time. And I will share when after learning game theory and other things, not a car buying experience, but I was calculating, pre-calculating, okay, what's the best way when doing video poker, right? If I'm playing video poker, if I get this hand, what are the best odds? And so it really wasn't game theory. It was more just probability theory. And my father-in-law at the time, I'm in Las Vegas because my wife's family is from Las Vegas, and he looked, and I was a graduate student at that point. And he looked over my shoulder. He goes, all my calculations. And he said, Dave, how do you think you're going to do? And I looked at all, the notes I had and all the things I'd written down. And I looked at him and go, well, I expect to lose. I expect to lose every penny. And I'm screwed in this game because that's the way the game is. I might win a big jackpot, but I expect to lose. And so that there's sometimes with game theory, you kind of analyze it and say, yeah, this is how screwed I am. Sometimes not the most desirable outcome is achievable. But I think, though, game theory in everyday life, that's what's the value of this chapter. And so I found it very interesting, and that it's in here at the beginning, a very different approach.